I'm here now. Brothers.
Thanks, Joe.
Kath.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
Just so everyone's aware, that's the recording started.
Thank you. It being 11 o'clock, can I welcome you all to this meeting of Midlothian Council. Before we have the preliminary statement from the Provost, I wonder if we just check that all connections are working and that we know if anyone's unable to connect. Rona, have you heard from Kieran Monroe?
No, as far as I know, he's been given joining instructions by Marco's team. I haven't heard back from him.
His connection was working yesterday after a fashion. I believe the protocol is that we have to wait for up to 15 minutes if there's a connection problem.
That's certainly correct in terms of the protocol, Provost. I don't know if anyone of your team knows whether Councillor Monroe intends to attend.
Maybe there's some sort of time lapse between here and Canada he's not got right. Kelly, did you say you'd seen him appear on the screen?
Oh no, sorry, it was Joe that I'd seen appear.
Right.
Sorry, my mistake.
Verona, are you able to contact him by phone? I realise this is the middle of the night in Canada.
I've just contacted him. There's no reply, Provost.
Okay, Mr. Turpie able to give any advice other than the protocol?
The protocol is designed, Provost, to allow maximum inclusivity for the members and to ensure that people aren't prevented from taking part in the meeting due to technological problems. It would be up to the meeting to decide if they wish to proceed in Councillor Monroe's absence, given we don't have a note of it being a technical problem.
If anyone wants to move a motion to that effect and it's seconded, then we could perhaps proceed. Is that what you're saying?
Certainly, yes. It's certainly in the members' hands as to how they wish to proceed with this. Given that he's a member of your group, you may wish to consider your position on this.
I think in the particular circumstances where he is, there may be some grounds for thinking that he isn't able to attend for some reason to do with the time lapse and all the rest of it. A situation different from other councillors, but I'll accept comments on that.
Councillor Curran, his hand up.
Yeah,
thanks, Provost. Just in the absence of any communication that there's no technical problems, then I propose that we press ahead with the meeting.
Is there a seconder for that motion? John Hackett. and one other. Is there anyone wishing to oppose this motion? Okay, there being no opposition, we should proceed with the meeting. Good morning and welcome to this meeting of Midlothian Council. Members are aware of the virtual meeting protocol previously circulated. I would like to draw your attention to the following. Members should mute their microphones and only activate when invited to speak. Once you finish speaking, please remember to once again mute your microphone. Members who wish to speak should do so by using the raise hand option and lower your hand once you've spoken. With regard to some of the reports of the agenda, it will be necessary to ask members to vote. Votes will be taken by way of a roll call. The minute will not include the roll call vote unless a member has been successful in moving a roll call vote in terms of the existing standing orders. The public part of the meeting is being recorded and a copy of the recording may be uploaded to the Council's website. Should the meeting last more than 2 hours, it's my intention to break around the 2-hour mark for 15 minutes and if necessary, repeat this again after another 2 hours. Could we now move to apologies? Verona.
We have apologies from Mrs Robertson, the Executive Director, and also from Mr Bourne and Mrs Morton.
Thank you. Order of business is as submitted. There's with the 2 additional papers you should have received on Friday on finance, which Mr Fairley will talk to, and there's the withdrawal of the paper on our cross-border working with Borders Council. Declarations of interest may be raised at any time in the meeting. No deputations. We have the minutes of the previous meeting. Could I see if there are any matters arising from the minutes? They're being done. Could somebody propose the adoption of the minutes?
Happy to move, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Milligan. Seconded by Councillor Hardy. There being no questions to the Council Leader, there being no motions, we now move to the public reports. 8.1. The joint board, which requires a decision. Could Kevin Anderson speak to this?
Thank you, Provost. This report is to regulate and reappoint the Council's voting members to the Midlothian Integrated Joint Board until the scheduled local government elections on the 5th of May in 2022. The report would normally have been considered at Council in May, but was affected by the COVID-19 situation, and the next Council meeting expected in October will be too late for the required deadline in this confirmation. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to oppose this decision? In which case I congratulate all the members on their re-election, thank them for their contribution to the IJB. Item 8.2, page 11. For noting the annual audit committee report. Could I ask Mike Ramsey to speak to this?
Thank you, Provost. I'm here to present and answer any questions on the annual report of the audit committee for 2019-20 as appended here at Appendix A on page 14 of 256. The audit committee reports to full council by way of the minutes which are presented to council throughout the year. And in addition, any special reports are submitted by audit committee to the council if any ad hoc items arise that we feel the council should be made aware of, but we have not needed to do that this year. This annual report that I'm presenting today summarises our activities through the year and highlights that we undertake a self-assessment of our effectiveness in providing scrutiny on behalf of the council. We have identified a few areas of improvement. These are noted at 4.3 on page 12 of 256. This year we'll be seeking feedback from officers and elected members about their views on our effectiveness to gain a broader understanding of the setting of risk policy, strategy and appetite. And we'll be keeping under review that as an oversight committee, we need to rely on other committees of the council, for example, the Business Transformation Steering Group and the Performance Review and Scrutiny Committees in order to fulfil our role correctly. One improvement we do need to make is that the sequencing of our meetings in previous years has been such that where Audit Committee has been required to scrutinise reports, for example, the Treasury Management reports, in advance of coming to full council, the sequence of meetings has not always permitted this. For example, in December, we had to scrutinise the Treasury mid-year report after it had come to the November council meeting. But this year, I think at item 8.4, there is the schedule of meetings that is being proposed should close that loophole for the coming years. We did review the Treasury Management report that's coming forward to you at item 8.11 in our meeting in June. There are a couple of inconsistencies identified there, and I think Mr. Fairley will be speaking to this when he presents the report. We're a small committee of only 6 elected members and 2 independent volunteers, so it's important that we have consistent attendance so that we both achieve a quorum, which is 3 members plus myself, and to ensure that any specialist training that we deliver to members can be utilised by those members when they attend and scrutinise the particular items they've been trained for. So a request for some consistency in attendance if possible. And lastly, I'd like to thank the internal audit team, the external audit team, and all the officers of the council and our members for the assistance they've provided during the year. It has been a relatively straightforward job to do despite the difficulties of coronavirus, and I think we've been reasonably effective, although there are improvements to be made. If there are any questions, I'll do my best to respond. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there questions on this report? It remains, I think, for me to thank you very much for doing this important job voluntarily and very professionally in the view of all the councillors who are engaged, Mike, and thank you again for that very full description of what we've been doing in the prior year. We now, therefore, can move on to counter fraud policy, page 20 of 302, Jill Stacey. This is an item which we have to make a decision to adopt the counter fraud policy, shown at the appendix.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, so this is one of the reports that has been presented via the Audit Committee on the 22nd of June during its consideration of the counter fraud annual report, and the recommendations are endorsed and to be presented to Council for approval of the revised counter fraud policy statement and the revised counter fraud strategy for the Council, which also requires additional resources in terms of the delivery of the strategy. The review of the counter fraud management arrangements has been undertaken to make improvements in light of the significant fraud investigations that have occurred within Midlothian Council in recent years, noting that some of these aspects are still ongoing. The proposed refresh and enhancements to those arrangements are contained in the revised policy and strategy, and these are designed to shift the focus of tackling fraud to prevention and detection. The new leadership structure and the key drivers for change provide an ideal opportunity for a whole council approach to tackling fraud, led by the new Integrity Group, whose terms of reference have been agreed by the Audit Committee in June. The intention is that the corporate fraud officers will work proactively and collaboratively with the Integrity Group and managers across all the Council's various services. This includes areas of procurement and contract management, covering significant spend with third parties to deliver goods and services and the associated fraud risks. So the proposal is to have 2 full-time equivalent corporate fraud officers. This is an addition of 1 FTE staff resource, which reflects the actual corporate fraud resources that have been deployed in recent years. The total savings, which was identified in the counter fraud report to the Audit Committee, the savings value relating to corporate fraud activities and the National Fraud Initiative, and these are ongoing. These work is ongoing, and the further outcomes are expected from these ongoing cases. Essentially, these posts are self-funded from savings and recovery from losses across the council, though permanent funding by budget is required to reflect this. Just to highlight that tackling fraud is an ongoing process as the council's internal and external operating environment changes. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the public sector to further fraud risks, as highlighted in a recent report published by Audit Scotland, which will be presented to the Audit Committee in due course. Thus, I'm seeking the Council to approve the revised counter-fraud policy statement in Appendix 1 and the updated counter-fraud strategy in Appendix 2, and approve the proposal to have 2 full-time equivalent corporate fraud officers to deliver the revised counter-fraud strategy, which requires additional resources. Happy to take any questions, Provost.
Jill, we looked at the actual report in June, and in this document you're wanting an annual review of strategy. Will it make sense for this to be done together, that we have a report and a strategy considered on the same occasion in 2021?
That's the intention. So when we review the outcomes in relation to our prior year activity, we'll also review the policy and strategy and ensure it's still fit for purpose, and we'll present any outcomes from that annual review of the policy and strategy as part of our counter-fraud annual report, which will be presented to the Audit Committee. That's the intention.
Thank you. Can we hear from Councillor Milligan and then Councillor Cassidy?
Yeah, Jill, if I was asking you to rag now what the council's position on managing to detect fraud and prevent fraud now at a very early stage, how would you rag it?
I think we're reasonably well placed in terms of our key controls. There are still some fundamental areas, and the focus in terms of the counter fraud strategy around the kind of procurement risks, where there are still significant expenditure through third party, and some of the controls around contract management, which there are still improvements required in that area. And thus we feel that the focus of the corporate fraud officers working with the procurement team and service managers in that regard. There are some new risks arising in terms of the way that we have been working in terms of COVID-19, some of the changes in terms of processes and procedures, and they'll need to be evaluated in detail. And that's part of our planned work as well, to be able to assess those emerging risks, assess the controls that are in place within the council, and provide assurance back through the Audit Committee and to full council. So that's what's intended in terms of new emerging risks, but there are still some improvements in terms of some of our fundamental controls around our procedures and practices, which have been highlighted by internal audit to the Audit Committee kind of previously, and are still ongoing. In terms of rating, it's kind of difficult to do a RAG rating kind of overall, but I would say probably high amber in terms of a RAG risk rating overall, and thus we do need to do some further work by way of assurance around those controls, as well as some enhancements to our fundamental controls.
Thank you. If that satisfies Councillor Milligan, we move on to Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Provost. I think Jill just answered every question that any of us must have about that this paper, but I just want to reiterate what the question Derek asked was the preventative part of this paper is what I am really interested in, because without it, we are open to all kinds of dangers, and I wholeheartedly support this. So that's my.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I wondered if we could add a recommendation in as well, that the councillors get some kind of training or briefing or seminar on even how to spot fraud, other than the absolute obvious. I wouldn't know if it smacked me in the face. So I think that would be helpful for everyone. Thank you.
Do you want to propose that as a motion, in which case we need a seconder?
Yes, I would like to have that added in because I think it's important.
Yes, of course, we do have training from time to time, but I think you want this to be upgraded to a very specific event for all the councillors. Jill, would you want to comment on that?
I'm very happy if the council wishes to make a specific recommendation, but as part of our counter fraud strategy and the annual plan, we'll be looking at fraud awareness training around the stakeholders. So that includes officers and elected members in terms of their role, and some of that fraud awareness training will be highlighting the whistleblowing route. So in terms of notification of any areas of concern, but I'm happy with the separate recommendation. If
no, the other councillors wanting to speak, but if we could just establish first of all, Verona, are you happy that you have a wording of a motion that we can then put to the council as part of this paper?
Yes, Provost.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Hardy, is that you seconding it?
Yes, Provost, actually, because and actually what Kath said was actually a point I was wanting to make as well about a more robust attitude to fraud from the council. So, I mean, I did want to recommend that we do some more training for council elected members in particular, because obviously identifying fraud is a very important thing that we all need to do. And I kind of wanted to comment that if we could make the document even more robust, because I didn't feel it kind of made it strong enough that actually identifying, reporting any fraud that is identified should be an obligation on everyone that works for this council, all elected members and all staff. We shouldn't be letting anything like that go overlooked or it's not my problem. So if we could toughen that up in some way, I'd really like to see that, particularly in light of everything that happened. But yeah, I completely agree with Councillor Johnson that wholeheartedly support more fraud training for councillors, and indeed bribery and corruption training as well, because as elected members we can be particularly vulnerable to being invited to events and suddenly finding that there's an expectation from an organisation because they've given you some hospitality or something that you weren't aware of. So a bit of anti-corruption and bribery training for councillors would also be appreciated.
Yeah, of course, there are existing rules on that. There's a question of being reminded strongly of them. Could I ask Councillor Wallace, followed by Councillor Alexander, and then Councillor Parry? Councillor Wallace.
I promised I was just going to second Councillor Johnson's motion when you asked for a second. That's so.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I endorse what Councillor Hardy was saying, but I also would like to put it that it should be more than an obligation for any of us to report any fraud that's going on, that it's actually encouraged. I mean, we don't want people stepping up and trying to blacken people's names, but I think that it should be very much encouraged that if anything is suspicious is happening, that it is encouraged that people come forward and tell us what is happening, because I don't think that was the case in the past, and that people were afraid to come forward and actually see what was happening.
Yes, that's a cultural issue. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. Just picking up on those comments, the Serious Organised Crime Task Force, which I'm a member of, is doing a piece of work on this at the moment, and they're linking in with the Improvement Service to do some training specifically for councillors on all the topics mentioned. So it was just a suggestion that we follow up that route, because I know how effective that training is.
Thank you for that. Are there further contributions before we turn to the motion? In which case, is anyone against the motion? If there is no one against the motion, I believe I'm entitled to consider it passed NEMCON. Perhaps Mr. Turpey could confirm that we now have a passed motion.
Yes, Provost, in terms of the protocol, it is almost by exception, so unless someone asks you to try to move an alternative amendment, then yes, the motion would be passed.
Thank you. So we have adopted the fraud protocol, and thank you very much, Jill, for the work that's gone into that, and also the motion calling for a councillor session on this subject. And indeed, I think we captured other areas where questions of propriety and the councillor's position would have to be brought again to the attention of all of us, as they should be on a regular basis. Thank you very much. We now move on, I think, to 8.5. This is a question of meeting dates. 8.4, question of meeting dates is split into two sections. One is the rest of 2020, which we originally adopted in June. And then there's a question of the policy for subsequent years. Could I ask the Director of Place to talk to these? Kevin?
Yep, thank you, Provost. The report, as you say, is for members to consider the cycle of meetings that are detailed in the appendix for the remainder of the calendar year, and also that these are held on an online virtual basis in accordance with Council's previous decision of digital by default. Provost, if I can request of members as a minimum today to agree the next Council meeting date in October to permit the required arrangements to be progressed. And if I may suggest, if members have any other concerns on the schedule, they may be delegated to the Standing Orders Working Group. The cross-party group meets later again this week. Thank you.
Yes, indeed, meets tomorrow, I think. Is that proposal acceptable to all the members? So we're just talking about the 2020 meetings, of which the one that is absolutely certain to happen is a council meeting, but there will be discussions tomorrow about any other arrangements. Is everyone content? John
Councillor
Hackett.
Hackett's try.
Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, it was just to note that quite a number of council meetings are during the school holiday terms, and I think there's been a previous decision to try and avoid school holidays. So I'm in agreement with agreeing to the October meeting, and the Standing Orders Group consider a new set of dates and bring that back to the next council. Thank you.
Can we therefore move to accept that position and ask Kevin to talk to the next paper, 8.5, regarding the longer term, 2021 and 2022?
Thanks, Provost. So this report is for members to consider the cycle of 21 and 22, as we've indicated, and those are detailed dates in the appendix. Section 3.5 of this report, however, lists other considerations for decision. And again, that may be an issue which members want delegated to the cross-party working group, which indeed meets tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, is anyone opposed to proceeding on that basis? There being none, we adopt that. Debbie McCall.
All sounds raised.
Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Provost. I'm not objecting to it. I just wanted to echo Councillor Hackett's concerns. I see there's, for this year, we've got Cabinet during the October week, and in February, full council, the IGB, Police, Fire and Rescue, and then going into Easter, GP, Planning, IGB and Cabinet, which is quite a lot if you've got school-age children, and I don't. So I'm speaking for everybody on this. But I think the parents who have had to homeschool their children during COVID and try and work at the same time, it's been a bit of a nightmare. So I think anything that we can do to try and avoid the school holidays and put more pressure on parents, I think would be a way forward, especially looking to 2022 if we're going to encourage more parents to stand as councillors. Thank you.
Points well made. Thank you very much. Therefore, I think we should proceed on the same basis and consider this at the Standing Orders meeting tomorrow. Moving on, 8.6, that starts off on page 44 of 302, and it's the meeting of the group leaders, which we need to have a decision to validate. Can I ask Grace Vickers to speak to this?
Thank you, Provost. And this is a minute of the meeting of group leaders which took place on the 11th of August. We really wanted to prepare should there be a potential local lockdown, a wave 2, but also in preparation for winter. There are a number of recommendations there and some to be agreed. Specifically, I wanted to draw your attention to the fact we thought it would be useful to recommend to Council that a seminar be held ideally during September or early October, hopefully September though, to discuss winter planning, emergency food, should this be required in light of the pandemic. So it's a note of the meeting, and I'm happy to take any questions about what we're planning.
Are there questions? In which case I think it's an opportunity to congratulate our leadership group on the efforts that have gone into attending not only to the initial phases of COVID, but also looking at contingencies and resilience should there be a further spike later on in the year. We therefore are agreeing to the seminar and approving the adaptation of the Standing Order 19.2 and all the other matters set out. We now move to 8.7, the Council House Building Programme. That's at page 52. Could I ask Kevin Anderson to speak to item 8.7?
Thank you, Provost. This report provides an update to members in the Council's Social Housing New Build Programme, with sections 3.1 and 3.2 listing the status of specific sites and the delivery outcomes in relation to each of those. In section 4.3, the risk issues are detailed in the impact of COVID-19, the disruption to the construction industry and resulting slippage, which will likely occur, whilst also noting the mitigation efforts to target delivery and site-specific impact is also listed there in respect of those. Essentially, the report advises members that from the initial target of 1,000 properties, we at this point in time, subject to any programme change and direct purchases, would be 135 units short, but the proposition within the paper is indeed that we make direct purchase to address that shortfall. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions? Stephen Curran.
Thanks, Provost. This council's led the way when it comes to house building in Scotland, and it's good to see that we're continuing on that path. And the report also reaffirms our commitment to the house building programme. It also evidences our commitment to our tenants who had previously agreed after consultation to pay a little extra in their rent to help fund these programmes. And we certainly couldn't have achieved what we've achieved so far, nor could we be so ambitious in phases 3 and 4, where we see a spend of over £136 million. So I just want to put my thanks on record for their support. Also welcome the amendment to our design briefs to target our zero carbon approach. Not only is this beneficial for the environment, but also helps address fuel poverty, more efficient heating and less demand. Sorry, my phone's going, typical. Just on the COVID impact, I know that on the current projects, and I'm wondering just in terms of the planning, the comment on planning, I'm wondering if there's anything that we can do, at least in the short term, to speed up the planning process and try to expedite these projects. And I'll leave that comment with my planning colleagues. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you for that contribution. Councillor Emery.
Yeah, thanks very much, Provost. Councillor Curran's already alluded to what I was wanted to speak to, and that's on page 60 regarding the planning department and talking in terms of one sentence saying that they're going to take 4 months to deal with planning applications. Now, I have to say that I don't find that acceptable at all. In fact, not only should we be fast tracking applications back to what we were before, but we should be really, if we are going to do anything about our economic recovery, we should be doing our plans that are fit for purpose and are within the local plan. We should be accelerating that programme, and I just, want the council to agree today, or the councillors to agree today, that we get the officials to address that particular problem. It's not just in the public sector where we're talking about council house programme here today, but also the private sector, and getting people back to work has got to be our main focus if we're going to go through an economic recovery, Provost. So I just wanted to alert the councillors to a strapline that's in a paper that might have been missed, and I really do think we've got to have a real say on that particular problem, sir. Thanks.
Yes, I mean, the Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee often look at the speed of applications being granted in Midlothian. And put it this way, we're not the fastest county in Scotland. It is an area where with Section 75 contributions can help pay for extra staff if it's a resource problem. But I agree we should need to discuss this offline with the officials and see if we can improve on the current position. Further contributions? Report is for noting. We now therefore move on to 8.10. Special treat. We have 8.8, which is the late paper on the COVID-19 financial update from Gary Fairley. Gary, would you like to introduce this?
Sorry, Provost, see, before you move on, Councillor Emery asked that we make sure that the 4 months isn't acceptable to us, and if we just simply note the paper, effectively we're agreeing to the four months. And I'm just wondering whether or not elected members are happy with that, given the points Councillor Emery's made. We've actually agreed through the leadership group that we would accelerate stuff here, so if anything at all, but with the backlog of people waiting to get small extensions done, planning applications, to be quite frank, we might need to add resource to that. And I just wonder whether than just note that paper, we should actually be addressing it.
Well, I think that maybe calls for a motion. This is a report just for noting, but clearly there is a debate going on, which both Councillor Emery and myself and other councillors, Councillor Hardy is very interested in. Mr. Turpey, are we? Is it proper to take a motion at this point?
Yes, Chair. I mean, the reports are only ever officer recommendations. So the recommendation in this case was only that the particular paper required to be noted. However, if the leader of the council wishes to make a motion to have some substantive action taken and that's seconded and not opposed, then that's quite competent.
Okay, so the motion would be that discussions will be held between councillors and the planning department about accelerating the 4-month figure as much as is reasonably possible. Is that clear enough, Verona, as a form of words? And Councillor Milligan, are you happy with that sort of form of words?
Yeah, I thought through the leadership meetings with officers, we had been really clear to them that we expected stuff to be accelerated as much as possible. So I just formally move that the 4 months isn't acceptable, that indeed we're looking for it to accelerate in the 3 months, and we would ask officers to take the appropriate steps to make sure that planning applications and building warrants are dealt with at speed and appropriately. Okay,
can I have a seconder for that? Assuming that Verona's happy that the wording can be distilled from it. Councillor Emery, Councillor Hardy.
Yeah, Provost, quite sorry, I didn't put my hand up, sorry. Yeah, quite happy to second Councillor Milligan. It's not only about getting back to our normal time for planning applications, it's about accelerating that further, because I really do think we're a crucial factor in building back our economy. So I'm quite happy to second Councillor Mulligan.
Thank you. Is there anyone contra to this motion? I therefore declare it carried unanimously. And we then move on to the important paper 8.8 COVID-19 financial update. Gary Fairley.
Thanks, Provost. This report provides an update on the financial and funding aspects arising from COVID-19 and complements the financial monitoring reports also on today's agenda. I'd stress to members that you should note that the position remains fluid, and indeed the assumptions and assessment of lost income need to be reassessed following last Thursday's announcement regarding the earlier reopening of indoor leisure facilities. In terms of the report itself, Section 4 sets out the current understanding of national funding position with details of the Barnett consequentials to the Scottish Government and Appendix 1. Appendix 2 then provides an assessment of funding distributed from Government to cover both the specific costs councils have incurred, education recovery, and by way of general support to councils. It also provides an assessment of further funding expected for the education recovery in particular, but which is still to be confirmed either in terms of distribution or the arrangements to claim specific costs. In addition to government support, the paper sets out funding flexibilities applied, and the projections in the report assume funding from an income loss scheme. And members should note that this is an initial assessment based solely on a pro rata share of the Barnett consequentials. Since the report was finalised, Indications are that the £49 million of Barnet consequentials may no longer form part of the quantum for an income loss scheme, but actually be distributed as general support. And I'll keep members abreast of changes as the situation develops. Section 4 sets out a range of obligations that were placed on the council and, where appropriate, the associated funding, with the net cost assessed at £1.385 million, and details are included in Appendix 3 to the report. Appendix 3 also sets out areas where we've lost income, together with the impact of reduced operating costs, and as I touched on earlier, those need to be updated to reflect the earlier reopening of leisure services. On a more positive, previous assumptions in respect of council tax collection and planning and building control fees have been reviewed, and as a consequence, the projections are based on maintaining a 97% collection rate for council tax, and planning and building control fees be representing deferred income rather than lost income, and I suppose that ties together with the point raised in the earlier debate. Section 5 also provides an update on education recovery funding, noting the distribution arrangements for the first £50 million, with a similar basis proposed for the additional £30 million for teachers. Sections 6 and 7 provide an update on general services capital and also on HRA, and there's recommendations on the separate HRA paper later. Provost, the overall projected financial impact of COVID is summarised in the next report on the agenda, and as such today Council is asked to note the 4 recommendations in Section 1. I'd particularly draw Council's attention to the recommendation C, which is around the material assumptions on which the report is predicated, including estimation of funding from income loss scheme. The education recovery costs will be contained within Scottish Government estimated funding, and other flexibilities, and that council tax collection rates are sustained. Equally, the report assumes that it's predicated on a continued journey through the route map, and therefore any local or national lockdowns would require us to go back and re-examine the overall financial impact. Provost, happy to pause there and take any questions from members.
Yes, the expression pro rata occurred in your description of the arrangements coming through Barnet from the UK government into the Scottish government, but pro rata seems to be a very flexible concept, and I just wonder if Midlothian is not losing out because our population numbers are very historic and we are growing very fast, and therefore growth means we have many more obligations. I wonder if Councillor Milligan would like to inform us as to the discussions at COSLA as to how much we will get of additional Barnet consequential money.
Yeah, Provost, COSLA is normally a negotiating area, and on Friday, for example, the trenching money coming forward there will be recommended rather than 20% on poverty rather than on growth. And it's very difficult there. It's you're trying to persuade 32 councils to alter that scheme to make sure that the growing councils, which are outnumbered by the councils that are shrinking all the time. So there are difficult negotiations, but it is like everything. It's a group of 32 individual councils, and while we're going to try our best to try and negotiate that down the way so that favours us, the reality is there are more councils that are actually shrinking than there are growing.
Further comments, questions? I mean, the best I think that can happen is somehow all these various schemes bring us back to where we would have been before COVID. But we will have a special problem in that we are no longer receiving the dividend from Lothian buses, and that doesn't look as if we'll get it for a very long time, which is of the order of 400,000 to 500,000. Is that right?
Yes, Provost. So Lothian buses financial year end is at 31st December. So in terms of the year past, the company resolution was that it wouldn't pay a dividend, so we didn't recognise any dividend income in financial year 1920. Given the ongoing support for transport from government, I would think it's highly unlikely that the company would be in a position to pay a dividend in the current financial year, and then for the assumptions in front of you, assume that we'll lose a further £450,000 from that income source.
Okay, thank you again for the clarity of assembling all these various schemes and working out for us how much Midlothian is getting from them. Can we seg straight across then to the financial monitoring report at 8.9?
Yep, thanks, Provost. So this report provides Council with information on the projected performance against budget for the year and details of the material variances. I would stress this is a first quarter's report, so it's early in the year, and expect the position may change as the year goes ahead. At the present time, Appendix 1 highlights a projected overspend of £1.190 million, or 0.054% of the budget. The report then incorporates the COVID impact from the previous report and projects a general fund reserve balance of £3.442 million. I would stress that while there is a projected overspend, members should note that this reflects the key assumptions in paper 8.8. For example, the initial estimate of income loss funding, and an element of the overspends arises from the impact on COVID on delivering a range of change programme savings. And as the report highlights, relevant officers are required to deliver recovery actions at pace for those areas that are projecting an overspend, and accordingly it's anticipated that the net projected overspend will reduce over the remainder of the year once the impact of these recovery actions is fully validated. Section 4 sets out an update for the Midlothian Integration Joint Board, Section 5 the reserve position, and Section 6.3 of the report the key risks. And again, Provost, today Council is asked to note the report.
Thank you. Councillor Milligan.
Yeah, Provost, just to reiterate again what Gary's saying there, is that there are a lot of key assumptions in both these reports that can swing wildly either way. You see the stuff on sport and leisure. For this report was written, I think, Thursday, Friday last week, and already we're looking to have to change it as our leisure centres can open that bit earlier and for the better. Gary again makes the point, one of the biggest risks to us is future lockdowns or localised lockdowns that can swing this there. But I've got to say, if you look at where this council is in comparison to a lot of other councils, and I've got to say we need to actually take a bit of credit here along the line in the cross-party working groups through business transformation, because we've got a lot of stuff in place now that we wouldn't have had if we hadn't agreed to jointly work together. And I think we should take our hats off to each other, not just to officers here, because I think without that cross-party working, we would have been a heck of a lot worse state.
Yeah, and we're all conscious that the forward deficit, I think 4 million for the next year and 9 million after that. But I read that Highland Council are expecting a cumulative 32 million of a deficit, so it could be much worse. Are there further comments on this? We're down to what, 3.3 million on our general account. So we're back to where we've been many years, worrying that if there's a beast from the east, a bad winter, we could be eating right into that.
Yeah, so at this point, the projected unallocated reserve, the sort of fund to deal with unforeseen events, is projected at £3.442 million. When the reserve strategy was set, we said we should try and keep a minimum reserve of 3.3, but recognising that was in a world before COVID was part of the vocabulary. So we are, relative to that reserve, we are above the minimum level. So in terms of your current reserve policy, there's no requirement on the council to take immediate action. However, we will bring forward further reports to council, depending on the agreed date, certainly at November council, and continue to keep council abreast in the interim of the sort of quarterly monitoring of the changes in assumptions and changing picture that relates to the COVID impact.
Thank you for that. There being no further questions, can we move now to 8.10, the housing revenue account? Gary.
Yes, Provost, this report provides council with a summary of expenditure and income on the HRA capital plan and a projected outturn on the both capital plan and revenue account. The report is for decision and it makes 3 recommendations. Firstly, in complementing the earlier paper on the housing programme, asks you to approve a provision of £16 million and associated funding to support the purchase of 100 off-market new builds. To approve utilisation of HRA funds to mitigate costs that cannot be charged to capital projects, particularly the Scottish Housing Quality Standard work. And otherwise, Council is then asked to note the report. Again, happy to take any questions, Provost.
Yeah, the final blob, we note a reduction in the reduction of the projected reserve of 6.151 million. I take it that that's intentional and is to do with accelerating purchase of sites that come available to us.
Yes, Provost. So the first recommendation, we add the £16 million of expenditure. We will aim to maximise the amount of government grant support we can get to fund those off-market purchases. And the remainder, rather than borrowing money and then repaying the borrowing costs, the proposal is to use the HRA available funds to meet that. And that reflects the Treasury position where, our strategy has been to borrow long term to fund investment in housing. But the indications, and again, looking at them again this morning, the indications that we won't see a rise in long-term borrowing costs through to May 2022. So it makes sense to change that strategy and adopt the funding position outlined in the paper.
Thank you. And Councillor Hardy.
Thank you, Provost. The only thing that struck me as a little bit unusual was 16 million for 100 new houses. That's 160,000 per house. Now, am I wrong in thinking that we also get 54,000 from the Scottish Government per house, which would make a cost of 214,000 per house, which is more than the average house price in Midlothian? That seems a bit on the expensive side. Are we sure that we're buying the right mix of properties, or are we sure we're getting the right deal for obviously the cost that we're putting in?
The question is it net or gross? Gary?
The £60 million is the gross cost, and that's for the properties on a turnkey basis. Clearly, colleagues within Place Directorate will seek to reduce the cost as far as possible. So, make sure we can buy the houses as cost effectively as possible, but also maximise the amount of which support we can achieve from government. So in short, the 16 million is the gross cost of the 100 houses.
But we're not in a position that if you buy off a developer, as we're doing here, that you don't get the 54,000, whereas you do get it if you build your own social housing. That's not the case.
Provost, if I can intervene and answer that question. Yes, we do. We do receive the subsidy. It's £57,000 for new build properties and £40,000 for buybacks, existing properties. So we do get it for the new build direct purchases, to answer your question.
Would we get the 40,000 rather than the 57 is perhaps the point?
We'd receive the 57. We've had that clarity from Scottish Government before exploring that option with the
I thought that was the case. Councillor Milligan?
Yeah, as my memory serves me right, this is something actually we negotiated with the Scottish Government, and I think the Scottish Government are trying to push out to all other local authorities as a way of not only getting the council housing we need, but stimulating the building industry to get it turning again.
So the gross figure should be reduced by receipts from central government?
The answer to that is yes. I would expect an officer to answer it, but the answer is yes.
Yes. Something funny is happening on my screen. Kath Johnson wants to speak. Kath.
Councillor Johnson. Provost, someone's sharing the screen here.
Okay, should I just wait till that clears or ask my question?
Kevin Anderson.
Okay, thank you.
I've
asked this question before. I'm always concerned about the House and Revenue account working on the prevention of homelessness. And I notice again that we have done no work on the mortgage to rent scheme. Are we doing enough to find out if people are actually eligible for that? And if we're not going to be using that, can that part of the funding go into preventing homelessness in another way? and not be just subsumed into the general house and revenue account.
Question, I think, for Kevin Anderson.
Sorry, Provost, I just had to log out and come back in again. I'll need Councillor Johnson to repeat that question.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. I note that the mortgage to rent funds have not been used again. I'm keen that we do as much as we can to prevent homelessness, probably more so than we've ever done before because of shortness in wages, etc. So I just wondered if that money could not just go into the ordinary housing revenue account, but absolutely be used for the prevention of homelessness in some very directive way.
Yes, absolutely. So the answer is yes, that's ring fenced. We don't use it for any other purpose. The mortgage to rent scheme led by Scottish Government has specific criteria for eligible applicants, and it's accessed through the Citizens Advice Bureau and referrals from there. And in turn, we get those nominations, as it were, from Scottish Government. There certainly has been a significant reduction from the uptake we've had in previous years, but I can reassure you that money is, as I say, ring-fenced and safeguarded for that purpose.
Thank you. Councillor Hardy.
Sorry, Provost, I left my hand up there.
Okay, good. Thank you again,
Excuse
Kevin,
me,
for that paper.
Provost, I'm not sure that my question's been answered. I'm saying if that money's not being used, are we still sure that it will be used in the prevention budget on some other scheme?
Okay, so I think Kevin's answer indicated that we're open for business on mortgage to rent, but in practice there's been low demand. And your question is, can we divert that to some other aspect of alleviating housing poverty or housing difficulties? Kevin Anderson.
Sure. At this point in time, the answer is no. It isn't able to be used beyond its dedicated purpose. We can certainly make inquiries following Councillor Johnson's point to see if there's any flexibility, because again, I appreciate the background to our question, and we can only but ask from Scottish Government if there's any flexibility in the rules of their scheme.
Do you want to take that offline and make such inquiries? Yeah,
yes,
sounds good.
We'll do so.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you very much. 811.
Provost, sorry.
Hello, Councillor Milligan.
Provost, yeah, just on Cass' point there, I would have some concerns at this time removing that money. Whilst it maybe hasn't been used up to now, my concern's going to be here that we're now about to see a downturn like we've never seen before, and a lot of people who have got mortgages that are now going to struggle to pay them. For the last 3 or 4 years, you've seen Scotland's employment going up the way and prosperity getting better. And with this COVID-19, you could see an awful lot of families suddenly in a completely different position. And I would be really worried that money was moved. And I would suspect the Scottish Government would be the same.
Yeah, there may be other forms of mortgage subsidy that don't actually involve giving up the equity in the house, but of course there'll be tensions with that as well. This is a subject, I think, for discussion offline, but your point is well made, and I understand the inhibitions that the Scottish Government would have in doing anything that could be open to abuse. Can that be discussed at another point offline? Are you content, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Milligan, Kevin Anderson? I think so. Thank you for your contributions on it. 811, Gary Fairley, Treasury Management, page 70 of 302.
Yes, thanks, Provost. The report informs members of the Treasury Management activity which was undertaken in the last financial year and also of the year-end position. Provost, within the review papers itself, page 78 to 101, I draw your attention to page 83, table 4, where the maximum gross borrowing figure is incorrectly stated and actually should be £283.384 million. And on page 93, where the maturity date of 1939 should of course be 2039. Both of these points were picked up at the Audit Committee, and my apologies for them not being reflected correctly in the paper in front of you today. Provost, the report was, as I said, considered by Audit Committee on the 22nd of June and is today presented to Council for noting. Thank you.
Are there any questions? You are all as councillors responsible for our Treasury strategy, not just the Audit Committee, and that's why it comes to Council. Any queries? We're content to note the Treasury Management Report. Thank you very much. 8.12, allocation of poverty funding. Decision required. Joan Trement.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, Provost. The report highlights 4 recommendations within the poverty funding use. As a result of COVID-19 pandemic, we're obviously very aware that there's many people within our communities that are facing financial hardship. Therefore, the recommendations highlight a speedy response to this in relation to using the poverty stream for both the large and the small grants, which has generally been undersubscribed every year. However, at Council on the 17th of December 2019, it was agreed that officers could review the criteria for this grant stream for the financial year of allocations 21 to 22. And the report sets out how we would aim to do that and the funding that's available to use for this. Happy to take any questions.
Fine, so you're suggesting a new mechanism which will perhaps accelerate the deployment of these grants.
It's a mechanism that's already tried and tested, Provost, yes, that we use for the small and large grants, yes.
Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. It was just a kind of couple of points about the participatory budgeting mentioned in the paper, which I totally commend. It's an approach that I wholly endorse. But I'm still a bit disappointed to see that the council is still using small pots of money for participatory budgeting, and it would be good to hear about any details about mainstreaming for MPB that the council are looking at in their approach. Lots of councils are looking at this approach. So there's many councils, for example, that now PB their entire HRA account in East Lothian, and there's other really good examples out there as well. So just a wee bit frustration that we're still looking at small pots of money, but good that it's happening. But it'd be good to get an update on our mainstreaming ambitions.
Joan, are you able to comment?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Councillor Parry. Yes, as you're aware, we've done a few things in relation to participatory budgeting, and at the moment we're doing a review with audit to look at how we can improve our practice in relation to that, and I would intend to bring a report back to Council once we've got the findings of that report, and we're better able to advise you how we aim to take that forward. So it is something that we're looking at for the future, so I will be able to update you within a short period of time. Okay.
When will that report be back?
I've only got the review, the audit's just underway at this moment in time, so I have a draft report. I'm going on a fortnight's holiday, so I would expect October, Council. I would hope to bring a report back. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
And Councillor Hackett.
Thanks, Provost. I think just given the level of poverty that there is in the county, I can only speak for my ward in particular, and I know there's other areas of identified deprivation. It's really disappointing to see that money's been undersubscribed. I certainly welcome the opportunity to have another look at that, and I would be interested to be involved as a councillor in the group that, as part of the recommendations, as part of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you for volunteering. The further comments? Therefore, we have decided to accept the recommendations.
Chair, I think Councillor Johnson wishes to speak.
Yes, Councillor Johnson. I think you're on mute. Councillor Johnson, you're muted.
Thank you. Our nominated person would be Councillor Diane Alexander. Thank you.
So we have two nominations. I'm not sure the paper provided for nominations, and perhaps that has to be formalised at some later date, but I've obviously no problem with these names going forward.
Chair, I think Councillor Alexander and then Councillor Milligan both have indicated they wish to speak.
Yes, Councillor Milligan.
Can I move Councillor Hackett? He's not allowed to move himself.
Yes, so to speak. Okay, so those names go forward, but we will presumably at some other council meeting validate them, because it's not actually in the agenda. Councillor Johnson.
Alexander wanted in.
And after Councillor Johnson, Councillor Alexander, and then Councillor Winchester.
Sorry, I just forgot to put my hand down.
Okay, you're forgiven. Councillor Alexander.
Hi, sorry, I was My internet went down during that, so I wasn't able to partake in that particular part of the meeting.
Would you like Joan Tronent to summarise where we've got to on this paper?
No, I'm okay with it. It's just to say, sorry, I wasn't able to put my name forward or whatever.
Yes, and thank you for letting me know that a connection has failed at some point, albeit for a relatively small time. Councillor Hackett.
Thanks, Provost. I wouldn't want to delay this any further. It does say in the paper that there is a proposal for a group to work with officers and councillors. I think it's been the tradition now that each group puts forward a representative, whilst it's not explicit in the paper. We have 2 nominees already. I guess I could invite the Conservative group to maybe put someone forward and we can start this work immediately. I think delaying it for another 6 weeks, particularly in light of COVID, would be not a sensible approach to take.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I understand that the Conservative group have not had an opportunity to discuss who would want to do this. I believe there's one of a council group prepared to do it. So I'd just like to ask Mr. Turpey's advice as how to proceed.
Thank you, Chair. The thought occurred that if it's being a cross-party group and each group nominating one person, if a nomination to appoint en bloc was made today, that would allow all members to take part in the decision-making process.
Yeah, the issue is that it would be proper for us to have discussions within our group. It wasn't clear that there would be a call on the floor today for members. I'm sure we can find a member. Are you saying it's not proper simply to reserve a position for the Conservative group?
Alternatively,
if the rest of the council wants that, I would have thought that would be legitimate.
I certainly a motion to the effect of appointing Councillor Alexander and Councillor Hackett with a place to be filled delegated to the Conservative group. Would get this through today.
That sounds sensible. Is anyone against that approach? Councillor Winchester, I'm sorry, you were wanting to speak.
Thank you. I was actually going to propose Janet Leigh Douglas for the group. I'm sure she would act for us in a responsible way.
Fine, but given that the group has not had a chance to discuss that, could we just leave that as a suggestion from within the Conservative group to be validated as soon as possible? Is everyone content to proceed on that basis? Thank you very much. We've made that decision. We now move to the Town Centre Capital Fund 813, a report for noting. Kevin Anderson, it's page 137.
Provost, my colleague Derek Oliver is going to speak to this paper. Thank you.
Yes, sure. Derek.
Good afternoon, councillors. The purpose of the report is to provide council with a progress update on the project's allocated funding from the Scottish Government Town Centre Capital Fund. The allocation of 910,000 was awarded to the council as set out in the report to council on the 1st of October 2019, and also to seek approval for delegated authority to accept proposed revisions to the Pennycook Town Hall project.
Thanks very much. Councillors will remember we were given a very short time scale to produce shovel-ready projects, and eventually there had to be a rerouting of one of the project finances to the Pennycook Town Hall, and this is a further update. Are there any questions? There being none, Derek, thank you. Councillor Winchester.
Sorry, I should have declared an interest here since I'm a trustee of one group that receives a grant.
Thank you. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Provost. I just wanted to say how pleased I am with this. It's great to see the additional funding coming to Pennycook Town Hall, and hopefully it'll make a huge difference for the Town Hall area and do a little bit to regenerate our town centre.
Thank you. Very much support that from my background as being related to the architect of the Town Hall in the 19th century. There we are. Thank you for that. 814. Page 145, Capita Housing Upgrade. Kevin, could you talk about this hosted platform?
Yes, and Yeah, sorry, apologies, Provost. So this report recommends expenditure from the HRA budget of 284,000 for a required upgrade to the Capita Housing software service and a subsequent move on to a hosted platform. The paper notes the system is fundamental to service operations, and the recommendations are based on the options rationale in section 3.3 of the report, and also the benefits derived both to the service and customers in section 3.5 of the report. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
It looks like one of these situations where we haven't really got an alternative.
I would concur with that, Provost, certainly in terms of the timescales that are available when we'd be notified this system will be unsupported from the end of the calendar year, and the proportionate time it takes for procurement. You're right in that assessment.
Okay, are there further questions? Councillor Curran.
Thanks, Provost. Just one question, Kevin. It's a second bullet point at 4.3. A remotely located service is entirely dependent on a resilient connection from Midlothian networks to the internet. And I know we've not had a significant downtime for 5 years. Given that there's more people working from home, accessing the network, is there any increased demand on that, and does that pose a further risk?
It's a valid point, and it's one I'll need to come back to you on. Certainly, I know testing to our current capacity has not been disrupted or affected because of the number of people who are home working, but accepting your point about future projections, I don't know how far we have tested that, and I'll need to come back with specifics in terms of capacity beyond existing staff complement.
Councillor Johnston.
Thank you. I wondered if this is agreed today, what is the timeline then that we can get the new system up and running? And from my previous life, I know that the existing academy was not always compatible with what we had to provide the Scottish Government in terms of the HL1 return. Are we absolutely sure that this new system will be compatible with our partners?
Kevin?
So in terms of the first point, we get de-supported by the end of this calendar year, so this will be in place before that timeline. And in terms of its integration with other systems, such as the reporting to regulator and the Scottish Government, it would certainly be able to do so, but we know there are difficulties with their systems being integrated to external providers. So it has the capacity to answer your question, whether it will have that effect. We can hope the respective regulators and government aspire to that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have therefore taken that decision and move on to 8.15, homelessness update. Also for decision, Kevin Anderson.
Thank you, Provost. So this report updates members on the Council's rapid rehousing plan, some legislative change, and the expenditure that's being requested respectively for the former Lonehead Police Station and Janet Court to convert those premises for reuse as temporary accommodation. Certainly the legislative change has itself been subject to further change. This was as a result of the COVID impact, and the respective order that's cited in the paper was due to expire by the end of September. What that means in practical terms is no homeless household, regardless of its size or dependence or no dependence, should not be in bed and breakfast accommodation beyond a 7-day period. The government has subsequently extended that timeline now to January of next year. It was originally to be in place for April of next year. So there are efforts that have been ongoing within the housing service team to comply with that, and indeed it is on target to do so by the original day of September. So just again, members have sight of that. The other aspects in terms of the rapid rehousing transition plan takes account of our use or reuse of Lonehead Police Station and similarly Janet Court. Janet Court has been before members before for additional expenditure when we've been carrying out work and clearly discovered other faults within the building that needed to be addressed. Those were primarily based on the building regulations having changed. The original concept for Janet Court was to offset the bed and breakfast expenditure. The original estimates for that work in terms of the conversion was £443,000. The amount that we spend on bed and breakfast is £445,000. So consequently, it was clearly a gain to be made in that respect. The additional works that have been brought forward previously, and indeed these which are before you today, will certainly give an additional lifespan to that building of between 10 and 15 years. So again, it's in order to make sure that this is cost effective and of best value. In terms of Lone Head Police Station, again, there's been an increase in costs with a revision of the cost plan, because that varied significantly from the consultants who originally carried out the assessment of this property for us. That didn't take account of, again, the change of use into what will now be residential purposes. So subsequently didn't account for the improvements that are required to the thermal and acoustic properties of the building. Also, as you'll understand, the new sprinkler installation requirements that there are post the Grenfell incident, and also in terms of additional security measures that we put in place to safeguard the residents and any concerns from the communities, which we've experienced before at Pentland and also in Bonderigg with these temporary accommodation units. So consequently, that has effectively doubled the cost in terms of Lone Head. So the recommendations to Council are to note our compliance with the Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan to date, and to approve the additional funding that's been requested for Lone Head and Jarnac Court. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Curran.
Thank you, Provost. Although our Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan is in its early days, we have taken some actions already to support homeless applications and find solutions to ending homelessness. We heard earlier about our continually increasing housing supply with our new build programmes, and we've also revised our allocation policy, increased the allocation for homeless households, and we are utilising vacant council assets to reduce our B&B accommodation. Two examples which I'll come to, which are in this paper, is Jarnac Court and the former Lone Head Police Station. Also note the legislation change for unsuitable accommodation, and it's critical that we comply with that. The paper says that on average we've got about 46 persons in B&Bs at any one time. Can advise Council that as of yesterday we currently had 40 households in bed and breakfast accommodation, 35 of whom were single persons, and we expect this to reduce significantly in the coming months as we roll out our sharing projects, or as that expands. As I say, we expect that to reduce significantly. We spend about 1.2 million annually on bed and breakfast accommodation. In respect to Jarnac Court and the former Lone Head Police Station, these are critical to our rapid rehousing transition plans. Now, I know, just being a ward member in Dalkeith, there are concerns locally regarding the Jarnac Court project, particularly given Dalkeith experience with Lauder Lodge. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, this isn't Lauder Lodge. I don't want to go over old ground. You know, we've seen the petitions. Some people still think that homeless people are either alcoholics or drug addicts, and that is simply not the case. We know there's many reasons why people find themselves in a homeless situation. We need to change that narrative. And I think one way we could do that is having a similar approach as what we've seen at Pentland House, with an open day with that public engagement. I was up there that day and I found that really useful, and I know the local residents did as well. I'd like to see something similar at Jarnac Court if Council decides to proceed with that. So that engagement with the public is key. Irrespective of what we do with the Jarnac Court building, we're going to have to spend considerable sums in it. Some of the work that's identified is going to have to be spent anyway. The building's going to need some work, irrespective of what we do with that, whether it be office accommodation or homeless accommodation. So we are supporting the continuation of the project with the additional funding for the roof upgrade, and approve option 4 for the external enhancement. In respect to Lone Head Police Station, we are seeking a continuation for one cycle to request officers return with a report, exploring alternatives to a refurbishment, and to include in those alternatives new build units that attract the Scottish Government subsidy. Provost, there is a disappointing aspect to this report, and something I would categorise as project management. Although we want to see these projects proceed, I think it's critical we ask probing questions, and I would like to know how we arrived at this position today, which is so different from the expenditure position that was presented to us in the initial papers about 18 months, 2 years ago. Now, I acknowledge that members requested costs for the external envelope. That aside, why we were not presented with today's expenditure figures at the outset? Was it that the surveys or exploratory works were even competent? I'm aware I may be straying into some commercial sensitivity here, but these questions need asked and they need answered. Why are we at this position today?
Thank you for that. Obviously, the cost issues sensitive, so we're now heading to costs per unit almost as high as a council house itself, albeit there's obviously a different tendency there. Could I ask for further comments? Councillor Johnston.
Thank you. Many of the things that Stephen said are things that I'm concerned about. I mean, I've been talking for a long time about Jarnac Court and the length of time. It kind of puts into perspective the rapid housing transition plan. It's hardly rapid. I mean, if you had become homeless a long time ago, you may still be living in a bed and breakfast. Goodness only knows what harm that's doing to your mental and physical health, which will be an added burden to the council. And we have to be better at managing our capital programme to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. For too often and too many times this is happening. It's not good enough. I'm not sure what are the implications of adding an extension to Lone Head? And our group, we go for option 4 as well for the Jarnac envelope to the building. But I would like to know the implications of extending the Lone Head for one more cycle. Thank you.
Okay, so there appears to be a move to have the Lone Head matter come back to the council in October, if I understand correctly. Kevin, would you like to comment on that?
Certainly, there's, in terms of Councillor Johnson's point, that there's no construction work being tendered or proceeding there, so it doesn't have any impact in that regard. As I say, we are still working up the cost plan, which indeed I appreciate the need for accountability and scrutiny, which is why bringing this back in front of members, but clearly for their consideration and challenge in that regard. So we can certainly bring an updated position in respect of Lone Head specifically. To pick up on the points from Councillor Curran, yeah, I again share that disappointment that this project has been long delayed due to, again, additional problems that we found with the nature of the building, and we knew that when it was office accommodation, to be frank. But again, that's why we had brought a paper back for December of last year in relation to the fact that there were additional costs likely to be incurred, and we may indeed have been coming back again, as we're doing today, specifically in relation to roof works, which were anticipated then as well. We can clearly offer to members that we have an audit review of this process. Certainly there were issues in terms of the original commissioning of this work. But again, I won't elaborate on that in an open forum, but we can certainly address that through an audit review of the process.
Okay, so there would appear to be before the House, a proposal to at least defer a decision on Lone Head until we have further and better particulars. It's sort of once bitten, twice shy. So an internal audit review of the process would be what we're after. Councillor Curran, does that satisfy you, or do you want also to look into Jarnac a bit more?
No, I think we want to press ahead with Jarnac. It's been long enough to date, and the sooner we get on with that, the better. But I think in respect to Lone Head and the option we put forward, I'd probably like to hear from local members as well.
Okay, so I think that's a proposal before the House. There's several others who would like to comment. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I'm just concerned about the cost per head at the Lone Head police station. It just seems an awful lot of money per head that we're helping, and I wonder if there's better solutions to using Loanhead to get more people in, or is there a better solution altogether? That's my concern.
Yeah, I think this is a question for Kevin as to the scope of the paper he'll bring back to October, whether it is simply looking at qualities and surveyor type data, or whether we actually ought to completely rethink what we're doing at Loanhead. Kevin, would you like to comment?
As you say, we've proposed this project predicated on using an existing asset, so we make use of that, but certainly the considerations of members about a complete new build are ones that we can consider, or indeed whether there are additional extensions as a proposition from one of the members as well as this afternoon, and we can take account of those for the scope that we bring back in the October cycle.
Okay, so on that basis, we're not just looking at quantity surveying issues, we're looking at a much wider strategic question for that particular asset in the centre of Loanhead. Councillor McCall, who's on mute.
Thank you, Provost. I'm appalled at this, that we're looking at almost double what was originally proposed, and I cannot see for the life of me how we are supposed to make decisions as councillors when costs just seem to absolutely rocket. I mean, obviously we want to have good quality accommodation, but I'm absolutely stunned. And this isn't, I think it's fair to say this isn't the first time. We've got Pentland House as well, and I'm now being told that Pentland House has got a shelf life of another 3.5 years. So what's the plan? How much money have we spent on Pentland House, and what's going to happen in 3.5 years with the 40 odd people that are in Pentland House, if that's the number at the moment? I think we're trying to do I'm really angry about this. We're trying to do our jobs with our hands tied behind our backs when we're not being given enough information, the correct information, plucking figures out the air. I'm really unhappy about this, and I would absolutely support the proposal to put the Loanhead part to the next cycle.
Are you also wanting to have commentary on Pentland House in this paper from, sorry to create more work for you, Kevin, but perhaps we should look at all of the assets we have in this space?
Yes.
Kevin, are you able to give meaningful feedback on Pentland House at the same time?
Certainly in terms of Pentland House, from the paper, as I recall, when it originally came forward to members, was indicating there was about a 7-year lifespan in that property without any additional maintenance being carried out. And Councillor McCall's estimation is about right. That must be about 4 years that we've had occupation of that building as for homeless accommodation use. So that timescale would be right. But in terms of do we then demolish it, because it was always tagged as a housing development site in any event, again, we can certainly scope that into what the options are for Pentland House as part of our review.
Councillor Curran.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I forgot to take my hand down, but yeah, I agree with the comments and deferring that paper for a cycle, also to include the Pentland House as well.
Thank you. And Councillor Alexander?
Yes, I think that in every new project that we deal with, there should be a timescale. So 7 years on a project to house people seems a very, very short time span. When we're going forward, should we look at what it would be for a house? So you build a house and you expect it to last 50, 100 years. And I think that should be the same expectation for temporary accommodation. And then if it isn't needed in the future, it can always be put into permanent accommodation. To look at short-term, very expensive projects, I think is a waste of the public purse.
Yes, there's a cost-benefit issue here. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, I just wanted to echo some of the comments that Councillor Curran made at the beginning, particularly around the rapid rehousing plans and how important they are. And I've certainly spent a fair bit of the last few weeks talking to Loanhead residents about this proposal. I'm so supportive of it. I'm so supportive of anything that we can do to try and help homeless people in Midlothian. But and kind of trying to persuade people the value of this project, to then see the details of this and how it skyrocketed, it's been really disappointing actually, because I was really behind it. And when you have a look in the variance report, there is additional budget lines there for further exploration exercises. And, you know, you have to think to yourself, well, what is that then going to throw up? And then what is the maximum amount of this going to be? So I'm happy to second Councillor Curran on moving this to the next cycle. And it would be good to get some local ward member involvement in this as well, and looking at what options we can bring forward, because I don't want Loanhead or Midlothian West to lose out on this opportunity, but I do want to make sure, like everybody else, that it's good value for money and that it's the right thing in the right place to help people.
Thank you. I can see Councillor Winchester is nodding in agreement there. Councillor Curran again.
Yeah, just to echo Kelly's last point, I think that public engagement locally is key. You know, we need to change the narrative here for people who find themselves homeless, and that engagement, that communication is vital. I'm wholeheartedly behind that. Yeah.
Councillor Winchester.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, I echo Kelly's what Kelly said about local councillors' involvement there. At the food bank since March, we've seen a lot of people who are in these bed and breakfasts coming for help, and they have no cooking facilities. So all we can give them are pot noodles or anything that can be cooked using a kettle. So the sooner we get people out into some sort of accommodation where they can have decent meals, the better. But it needs to be at a cost that the council can afford and not a rising cost the whole time.
Thank you.
Councillor Cassidy's wanted to speak for some time.
Yes, he's not coming up on my screen. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Provost. Yes, I'd just like to echo the words of Councillor McCall. The rising costs in these projects are something that is really concerning for my constituents, especially in Dalkeith, where for 20 years I've been promised a new town centre, and then suddenly they're slapped in the face with an almost tripling of a estimate for the repairs on the building in Jarnart Court. We really must do better for the public of Midlothian when it comes to this, because the lack of communication seems to be a massive problem. And if you go to any social media site, Midlothian Council has been dragged through the mud because these projects are running at such high overcosts. And I just wanted to put that across for the people of Dalkeith, especially.
Thank you. But I think we're all agreed that bed and breakfast is not the solution, and we need to move away from that. Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Further comments? Kevin, are you happy to? Councillor Imrie.
Thanks very much indeed, Provost. I've listened to the debate and I didn't want to come in because it looks like we're going down a road together. But what I don't want for Loanhead is for that, and no disrespect, the Penland House report all to be put in one report. I think it should be two separate items. In fact, actually, I'd go further. I think the financial aspect of Penland House, Jarnart Court and Loanhead should be one report, but the options, an option report for what we are going to put on the Loanhead site, should be subject of a separate item on the agenda, Provost, because there's two different facets we're looking at. One is what we can do for the rapid response housing plan in Loanhead, and the second one is the fiscal side of the three projects, because to my mind, I was appalled, like other members, when you see the costs, you actually think to yourself, should we stop and start all over again, which is not the right thing to do, is the right thing to do in one way, but in terms of the people that we very much care for, then it's the wrong thing to do. And that left me in a very much a dilemma. But I'd just like to see these reports on the financial side separate from the options for Loanhead, if you don't mind. I know you want to put it into one report, but I do think there's a there's two fundamental issues here, Provost. Thanks.
Well, they will be related. I don't personally mind how we cut and dice this. I think that's maybe a question for you to discuss with Kevin Anderson offline, so we get the greatest clarity of how we're going to optimise cost and benefit. That's all it's about. Councillor Curran.
Thanks, Provost. I know I've been on a couple of times. I appreciate your patience. Just final question, really. I think we're all on the same page here and where we want to go. For Kevin Anderson, can we foresee, is there any areas that are unexplored that may raise these costs further? Is there anything that is there anything we're aware of that's unexplored that we've not seen that may increase the cost? Because I think if there is, then we need to know about these now.
The unknown unknowns. Kevin Anderson.
That is a potential, yes. Once we start literally opening up buildings, that was certainly our experience at Pentland. It is currently our experience at Jarnac, and we have yet to get into that position looking at Loanhead. So I can't give you that guarantee here today that there wouldn't be any additional costs, but clearly that's what we need to scope into the business case for each of these properties respectively, and align that to the best value for the financials. So that's what we'll aim to do for October Council.
In terms of the motion before the council, what we're doing is agreeing to steam ahead with Jarnac. We know we're maybe in too deep already to withdraw from it, but we will defer the decision on Loanhead and have a look at Pentland as well. Councillor Muirhead.
Yeah, I appreciate what Councillor Curran's saying there. Is there anything else that could potentially be identified that would increase the costs even further? Unknown unknowns, if you like, but there are actually known unknowns in that paper, because there's a whole list of things that are there that have got question marks over them that could have, and the risk section of the paper, it talks about a whole load of things, including even the VAT element of the one at Loanhead that is not being determined yet. So there are a list of things that could add to the costs that we're aware of, but we just don't have the information yet.
And the point is, as the motion stands, we're going to steam ahead with Jarnac, but defer a decision on Loanhead and also look at Pentland. Councillor Russell.
Thanks, Provost. I just want to concur with, obviously, Jarnac Court being the main issue for myself as a Dalkeith member. Hope that the costs are kept to where we are at the moment, which is, yes, it's a lot of money. I think we must remember at the heart of this is people who are in situations, no fault of their own in many, many cases, who have become homeless, and we have responsibilities for them. We've got 40 in B&Bs at the moment. We must move ahead as quickly as humanly possible to get these buildings up and running so people get the security of even being in temporary housing, and then move up our lists. Say, at the heart of this is our people.
Thank you for that. Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, I was removing the sweetie. Kevin mentioned that these former surveys have been wrong and we had to procure that. Is there any comeback on the company that we can be recompensed for not being as well, for being misleading and the renovation cost? I'm sure if I bought a rundown house and had a surveyor say that it cost X amount of money to do up, and then it came to be double the cost, I would want to be pursuing him for some compensation. Are we able to do that?
You know, of course, the change in regulations post Grenfell, that couldn't be part of it. Kevin, would you like to comment?
I could indicate to Councillor Johnson that there is activity and action in that respect, but I can't give any detail in an open forum. But happy to update her offline with greater detail.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all for that important debate. Kevin, are you clear as to where your marching orders are for the October meeting?
Yes, certainly been left in no doubt, Provost, that the content of what will come back in October. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We now move to 8:16, Glencorse Primary School. In Fiona Robertson's absence, who would like to talk to this?
Joan Trinent.
Joan Trinent. Joan.
Okay, just to acknowledge that this paper has been presented to the cross-party working group on several occasions to fully explain the circumstances around our proposal. There are 73 primary school aged children within the catchment area of Glenclose Primary. However, only 7 pupils currently attend the school. Of the 2010 primary schools across Scotland, there are around 30 schools with a school roll of 7 or less. Most of those are in rural locations in the Scottish Islands. So just to give you some context in relation to that. In June 2020, we held a virtual parental engagement meeting and subsequently wrote to parents offering them the option to mothball the school from October 2020 or June 2021 to allow time to develop and agree on the optimal solution for primary school provision for the Glencourse catchment and to defer undertaking statutory consultation. The majority of parents were not in agreement. In these circumstances, we consider that the best course of action is to proceed without delay to statutory consultation on the proposal to permanently discontinue the provision of primary education at Glenclose Primary School with effect from the 25th of June 2021 and to extend the catchment areas of the neighbouring primary schools, namely Bilston, Morriswood, Roslin, Strathesk, and include the catchment area of Glencourse Primary School. I think also for noting was that in 2018 within Glencourse Primary there was no primary 1 intake. This was the same year that Roslin Primary School was opened up, and out of the 11 children within the Glencourse catchment area, 9 of them went to Roslin Primary School, the other 2 went to alternative schools but not Glencourse. Therefore, the Council is therefore requested to authorise the Executive Director of Children, Young People and Partnerships to undertake statutory consultation on the proposals to permanently discontinue the provision of primary education at Glencourse Primary School and to adjust their catchment boundaries from Bilston, Morriswood, Roslin and Strathesk Primary Schools to incorporate the catchment area for Glencourse Primary School. Appendix B of this highlights the consultation timescale. Appendix C highlights Glencourse Primary School roles over the various years, and Appendix D highlights the operating course for Glencourse Primary School. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. People will probably be unsurprised to hear me speak on this item, and will probably remember the last conversation that we had about it that went on some time. But I just wanted to address a couple of points, if I might. First, I'm sure all councillors will have read the email from Pennycook Community Council about the closure of Glencourse, and they make some incredibly valid points around the nearby primary schools that are already at capacity, around the commuting for children to get to new schools, and about Auchendenny as a community as well. I mean, Auchendenny doesn't even have a bus service anymore, and here we are trying to close one of their primary schools. I think that's really, really unfair. And I think the timing's really unfair as well, at a time when we're looking for kids to be in smaller bubbles and smaller classes. Glencourse is ideally placed to do that. And kind of the second point I wanted to make was about the experienced parents. So when the proposal was there to mothball, it wasn't the case that the majority of parents wanted to keep it open. It was every single parent at this school currently wanted to keep it open. And when they sent back the replies and told the council what it was that they wanted to do, some of their replies were really touching. Not just about their experience of the school and the quality of education that their children are getting there, but the experience in the way that they felt that they had been treated by the council. And I just wanted to touch on the Zoom meeting where these parents were told that their school was going to close. I was on that Zoom meeting and I did not know that the parents did not know what they were about to get told. And it just felt like some incredibly cruel kind of live virtual TV experience where you had to watch people being crushed. People were really upset. And I think that was a really cruel way to do that. And they highlighted that in their comments as well. So it'd be interesting to hear what other people think. I'm sure not everybody will agree with me on that, but I wanted to put on record that I fully support the parents in their drive to keep Glencourse open, particularly until we do have some further options for whatever school might end up near the A701 as well. I think that's an important conversation and one that should be a joined up one, and we shouldn't be having this as a standalone conversation to close a school during a pandemic. I think that's absolutely bonkers. So I can't support this paper today. So it'd be important to say that just without right. I will be voting against this paper. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Councillor Hardy, I think, had his hand up. Perhaps he doesn't know.
No, I do, Provost. Thank you very much. I actually echo quite a lot of comments that Councillor Parry made there. I mean, I think there's a very important factor that needs to be taken into account with Glencorse Primary School. It is located in Glencorse. The catchment area for the school does not include Glencorse, which is, I mean, an utterly nonsense situation. I mean, it's like it's been a very slow engineered process to drain the number of pupils out of the school so that they can find a reason to close it. I mean, I remember when I was a young lad attending school, there was a lot of kids from Glencorse at Glencorse Primary School, their local school. They're now no longer in the catchment area. I mean, we've created a situation where we've got a catchment area for a school that is only for people who are nowhere near the school, and the people who live, 20, 30 meters from the school are not within that catchment area and are expected to attend a school nearly a mile away from them. I mean, it's a ridiculous situation. We need to be looking at better options for this, and the needs of the local community, the needs of the parents and the children at the school, and also the needs of everyone in this age of the pandemic. Whether we need to be saying, well, we need to adjust the catchment area to allow more pupils to attend the school, particularly local pupils, or do we need to look at other solutions, perhaps joining it with Morriswood School and having a split school with perhaps a junior school and a senior school that would allow more social distancing and more options. And also we need to take into account there's a huge number of new house building happening in that locality, not far from Glencorse Primary School. It would be an absolute nonsense to shut a school and then 2 years later having to look at options to build a new school or expand Morriswood because we need more school spaces. So there's absolutely no way I can support this paper. And I think the way that the parents have been treated and the local community, and particularly the children at Glencorse Primary School, is a disgrace, and the council should be ashamed of itself.
I wonder if John Trinent would like to comment on this catchment area question that's been raised by Councillor Hardy, whether we have any flexibility to change the catchments so that it could become a viable school.
With respect, no, I mean, it's not my area of expertise. I don't know if Sandra Banks has managed to come into the meeting. Sandra is obviously an expert, although she's on holiday this week. No, she's obviously not there. I mean, I can take questions away, but... Hi, Sandra.
I am here.
Sandra, are you able to comment?
Yeah, I will try. I don't actually understand Councillor Hardy's point about, perhaps he's speaking about the proposal, but certainly the current Glencorse Primary School building sits pretty much at the heart of the Glencorse catchment area, which stretches quite far over behind the area that is Morriswood's catchment and also goes across the area of Auchendinney. So I don't know of any children who live closer to Glencorse but are in different schools' catchments. I just don't know what he's referring to. So very happy after this to share the catchment maps and so on so that you can see that, but there no, I just don't recognize that. The only thing I can think possibly that people might be referring to is the situation with the Glencorse barracks. But I don't know. That's all I can offer. I think perhaps there's a misunderstanding about this.
Thank you. It appears we have, as it were, a counter motion to the proposal here. Where we're coming from, we were going to mothball the school, which would have given no further consultation rights to the parents. We then moved to this position where we have a formal closure, which means that on statutory terms, there must be a consultation, and the consultation must not make a decision based on the cost per head issues and all that sort of stuff. What I think Councillor Parry and Councillor Hardy are saying is that we need to step back and have a further review before we move to any formal position on this, taking into account the house building in the area, the new 701 school, the issues like the Ross and Lee development, the availability of capacity at other schools. Now, I'm sure that all of this has been covered by Fiona and her team, but I sense we maybe want as a council to draw back from this and maybe come back to the October meeting. Is there anyone wanting to propose that?
Provost, the Cabinet Member for Education has been trying to get in for a while now. Is there any chance you could comment?
Absolutely. I'll just leave that on the blackboard, following on from Councillor Parry and Councillor Hardy's comments. So, but Councillor Alexander is first on my list, and then I'll work through progressively.
Jim,
Probably, I put my hand up.
Your head first on the list.
Second
then
here.
Councillor McCall, then Councillor Alexander.
Yes, the screen I have at the moment prescribes an order, but I'm happy to take your advice, Mr. Turpey, on who should speak first.
Okay. I think, assuming Councillor Parry's hand is still up as a legacy, it would then be Councillor Muirhead, Councillor McCall, then Councillor Alexander. The order that they've come up on my screen is putting their hands up.
The tech issue there. So Muirhead, Alexander, and McCall in that order.
No, Councillor Muirhead, Councillor McCall, then Councillor Alexander.
Okay, thank you for that advice. Councillor Muirhead.
Thanks, Provost. You know, I think we have to be clear this is the start of a consultation process, and it'll allow arguments and points to still to be heard. We entered into discussions, and Councillor Parry's right. I attended, as did the other members of the cross-party group on education, attended the meeting with the parents of the school. We have a view to try to get some kind of agreement on mothballing, and you know, mothballing isn't a situation where that's the consultation doesn't continue after that. The whole point of the suggestion to put it into mothballing would have enabled us to have consultations with the community and the parents to see what other alternatives could be explored. And I was quite surprised at the reaction from the parents, because I certainly am, and I believe the other members of the cross-party working group understood what we were there to try to do. And I think probably I intervened later on, and I think and maybe explained it a bit more, and people seemed to get it. And I was quite disappointed when the result came back at the end of the day. I just as Councillor Parry says, like a total rejection of the potential to mothball. I think we have to get and this into perspective here. We've got 7 pupils attending this school. There are 73 pupils of primary school age within the catchment area. So all this thing about suggestions that have been made about almost gerrymandering, there are reasons for adjustments to catchment areas, primarily to do with the introduction of the additional requirements for the army. They needed another 100 places, which couldn't have been accommodated by Glencorse at that time. So, but over the last 10 years, we've had very few. My understanding, Sandra can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we've had very few adjustments to the catchment area within that 10-year period, other than to do with the army coming in. So as I say, I was quite disappointed when we come back, because when the parents rejected the option of mothballing, because we offered the option of mothballing in June, at which point there would have been 7 pupils would have had to have been found.
Jim, I think your signal's faded.
Opportunity to mothball in August next year, which would have saw the pupils attending the school over that, the 7 pupils attending the school over that period. 3 of them would have been away at the end of that period, leaving 4. You know, so but they rejected that. I think we talk. You know, we've got these 73 potential pupils to attend the school. They choose, at 66 of them, or parents choose not to. And there's that. I've heard this argument being made that that's to do with the fact that there's a question mark held over the school. I would argue that a lot of that's got to do with the fact that the schools that are on offer, other than Glencorse, are modern, well-equipped schools that give the breadth of experience for the children that Glencorse cannot accommodate with the kind of numbers that it's currently got. It's a positive. I think that parents that have sent their children to other than their catchment area school have taken.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander.
That we've provided and the extensions that we put onto the likes of Morriswood. So I mean, I think it's important that we press ahead with this paper, and take the decision to enter into formal consultation on the closure of Glen course.
Okay, so the basic position is, having withdrawn the mothballing idea, it is actually better for the parents to have a closure, because that means there'll be a full consultation and the closure could be reversed as a result of the consultation. Not sure how well that will sell on the streets. Any further comments? Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, Provost. I think whilst obviously parents will have their children's best interests at heart when they're engaging with the council on this topic, but as Councillor Muirhead pointed out, the breadth of opportunities that are available in a small school, to have 7 to 4 pupils, it strikes me that the opportunities to learn a wide range of curriculum is affected in such a small school population. And I know no one really likes, it's uncomfortable talking about this when it comes to education, but the issue of best value, and I'm just wondering, in terms of the staffing and the costs, what would it cost to replicate that across the council? So every child had access to, I'm assuming, a head teacher, a school teacher, and I don't know what other staff is available. And again, you know, I don't feel comfortable talking about money when it comes to educating our children, but I think it's important that we're looking at best value as well on educating kids.
I understand that point, Councillor Hackett, but my understanding in statutory terms is that cost is not a valid consideration when considering the closure of a school. Joan Tronent, would you be able to comment on that?
My understanding is that you know, cost is a consideration when you're going into a statutory consultation. You must put the costs out there so that people are aware that, you know, it's 3 times more to educate someone at Glen course. It is not the primary reason as to why we're going into this, why we're requesting to go into this consultation. But we do have a statutory obligation to highlight the costs, is my understanding. That's
but not to make the decision based on cost.
No.
Provost, can I remind you that Councillor Alexander, in that order, are waiting to speak?
Councillor Alan, come again. My list is reading different from yours.
Right. My screen shows that Councillor McCall had their hand up before Councillor Alexander, and Councillor Curran has now joined the list.
Okay, Councillor McCall. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Provost. Unsurprisingly, I agree with what Councillor Parry and Councillor Hardy had to say. I don't know if everyone had the opportunity to read the email from Pennycook Community Council. It was very well written, with lots of pertinent points. And I think the problem that we have, that parents are choosing not to send their children to Glen course, is because it is being suggested to them that it's going to close. So what's the point in sending your kid to a school for a couple of years when it's going to close anyway? And so it's becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I think that's not good enough. If people are being advised by the council, oh, you really don't want to send your kids there, you want to send them there, that's just not good enough. And there's also this, I'm going to pick up on what Councillor Hackett said. There's this, oh, well, for the full school experience, you need to be at a bigger school. I don't get that. I was at a very small primary school that was threatened with closure, and thankfully it remained open, and it's one of the most successful schools in Edinburgh now. But I'm not getting this, oh, well, they're missing out. Clearly, if the parents thought they were missing out, they would want to send them elsewhere. And it's not like, you know, the parents aren't sticking them in a cupboard under the stair when they come in from school. You know, they will have a wide range of activities that they will be getting on with. You know, my daughter certainly had friends outside her own primary school when she was at primary because of brownies and stuff like that. You know, the school is not the only place where they are making friendships and being involved with other activities. So I will be voting against this paper.
Thank you. Councillor Alexander and then Councillor Curran.
Thank you, Provost. I actually will be voting for this paper. I think this isn't the end of the say. This is the beginning of the say, really. It's the formal consultation. And also, come next year, come the beginning of the session in 21, there will be 4 pupils there. 2 of those classes will have 1 pupil in it. I don't think that personally, in this day and age, that gives the pupil a full expanse of the curriculum. There's more than just learning, reading, writing, and arithmetic. There's all the digital things, there's the social aspect. Okay, children might have social lives outside of school, but an important part of social interaction is what happens inside school, and a great deal of learning with social activities, with doing things, doing projects, doing other things with children in school, playing games, learning that the way you do maths is maybe not the way somebody else does maths, and finding out how other children do things.
Now, but it keeps cutting out every now and again.
Do you want me to keep you on speaker?
So and the 73 other children's parents that have chosen to send them elsewhere, I don't think has been done exactly as a result of what has been put out there that the school might close. They've gone elsewhere because they can see the opportunities that other schools can give them. If those parents really wanted to have their children at Glencore School, they would still be there, and they would be fighting the cause to remain within Glencore School. So for me, I am actually voting for this to go ahead, for the statutory consultation to go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. And could I also hear from Councillor Curran?
Provost, I'm just going to comment on a technical issue. I think we've just seen part of that. I think Councillor Muirhead and Councillor Mulligan are having technical issues. It's an important paper and it's important that everybody is here. Yeah, so this might be a good point, as we've been at it for 2 hours now, to have a 15-minute break anyhow, so that IT staff can assist there. Is everyone content? I'm sorry to split the debate, but we obviously will have to come to a vote at some point. Marco.
Provost,
I can't hear Marco. This is a bad sign. Marco.
Sorry, I would suggest that the issues that Councillor Milligan and Councillor Muirhead are having to do with their internet connection, which can't stop this end. What I would suggest is we maybe dial out to them on their phones so they can listen to the whole proceeding phones and watch and mute on the screen.
And presumably they can speak as well, but not be seen.
Both can.
Yeah.
Provost, if we're having a 15-minute recess, it would give me time to go and switch every other device off in my house and just try and make sure that I'm getting priority on this connection.
Yes, we've all been there. Okay, on that note, unless anyone has a problem, I propose to have a 15-minute break and resume the discussion of the Glencore's paper at, I'll be generous, 20 past 1. Thank you all.
Can I just confirm, Provost, Diane Alexander's hand is still up? Is that just a legacy issue?
I believe so.
Diane? Yep. Okay.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Provost.